This used to be one of the most frustrating things for me when I first started out in photography. And that was not being able to produce sharp images on a consistent basis. So in this video, I'm going to give you all of the tips, the tricks and the techniques that I've picked up over the past 5 years of shooting in order to produce sharp images like these. And if you're a DSLR shooter like myself, be sure to stick around until the end of this video for my bonus tip, which I think may be the most overlooked reason for your photos not being as sharp as they could be. To start off with, let's break down what sharpness actually is. When we talk about how sharp an image is, what we're really talking about is how clear and defined the subject matter is in the image. Some of the attributes that help create a clear and defined image are detail, contrast, and textures. So with that in mind, here's some of the things that you can do to help improve how sharp your images turn out. Number 1, shutter speed. To prevent camera shake, try to shoot at a minimum same shutter speed as the millimeter of the lens that you're using. Here's an example. As you can see, I'm using a 50mm lens. So what I'm going to do is set my shutter speed to 1/50th of a second as a minimum to help avoid camera shake. If I want to switch over to my 55 to 300mm lens and I want to shoot at 300mm, I'm going to try and keep my shutter speed at around 1/300th or faster. Again, this is to avoid camera shake, which is caused by myself while holding the camera and lens. So that's a good start, but it won't help much if the subject that you're shooting is moving faster than the shutter speed that you're using. This is called motion blur, and it occurs when you set your shutter speed too slow in order to freeze your subject, resulting in motion blur. To solve this problem, all that you need to do is up your shutter speed to a point where it's fast enough in order to freeze the motion of your subject. And as with anything, the more that you practice, the better that you will get at understanding or guessing the shutter speed that you're going to need in order to freeze the subject in different scenarios and situations. At number 2, we have aperture. Tip number 2 is all about choosing the correct aperture for what you're shooting. For example, if like me, you like to shoot a lot of fast moving subject, shooting wide open helps to create subject separation, leading to a much clearer and defined image, especially when you're shooting with telephoto lenses like this 70 to 200 lens. However, for landscape photographers, stopping down your lens to shoot at the smaller aperture such as f11 or f16 is generally the right way to go, and that's in order to expand the focal plane so that the more of your image is clear and in focus. But keep in mind that stopping down your aperture more than what's needed may actually result in a softer image, and this is down to something called diffraction. The final point to keep in mind when it comes to aperture is that every lens is different, and they're all going to have their own sweet spot to where the lens is at its most sharpest. So there's a little bit of homework for you, and that's to go and find the sweet spot for your favourite lens, and to let me know what it is in the comments, so that if I ever end up with that lens, I already know what the sweet spot is. Number 3 is light. Tip number 3 is to shoot in the best available light possible. I mentioned earlier in the video that one of the attributes that leads to a sharp image is contrast. Here's a photo that I took on an overcast day, and here's another photo that I took on a bright, well-lit day. The direction of the light in the second photo creates contrast. This helps define the subject and create a much clearer image in comparison to the overcast image. And of course, you can always add your own light to the scene if the available light just isn't working for you. Number 4 is noise. The opposite to good available light is bad light, or should I say, not enough light. More often than not, a poorly lit scene will cause you to increase the ISO in order to get a correct exposure, and this leads to a noisy image with less dynamic range, less contrast and less detail. Here's some images that I've taken using high ISO numbers. If we compare those to these well lit images taken using low ISO numbers, you can see what I mean. So the takeaway from this is to avoid shooting at super high ISOs to retain as much detail as possible. Number 5. Technique. Tip number 5 is to work on your techniques for shooting in different situations. For the photographers who are shooting with a tripod, using something to weigh the tripod down so that the wind won't move it, or even worse, blow it over, is always a good idea. Consider using a shutter release cable or a remote to reduce the chance of camera shake while taking an image. If not, then most cameras have several timer options to delay the shutter from firing, which will achieve the same outcome. Shooting handheld requires a different set of techniques in order to help you create a sharp image. Holding your camera and lens in a sturdy position will help to reduce camera shake. Personally, I like to hold my camera like this, with my hands gripping relatively firmly on the body and the lens, and like this when I'm in the trenches. Find the positions which are the most comfortable for yourself. That's the best advice that I could give here. This next technique is called panning, and it ties into what we talked about earlier in the video when we were using the shutter speed to freeze motion. But what we're actually going to do here is the opposite, and we're going to use a slower shutter speed to create motion streaks in the background and the foreground of our image while trying to keep our subject sharp. When I'm taking panning shots, I like to rotate my upper body and not just my arms, and this is in order to create a smooth motion to follow the subject through the scene. When you're in the middle of the action, try to remember not to be too erratic when you're changing any of the settings on your camera with the dials and the buttons, and always try to remember to be nice and smooth when using your shutter button. Shooting with a telephoto lens can get you some great shots, but remember, the longer the focal length, the more exaggerated your movements will be, and this would leave you with blurry shots. Number 6. The bonus tip. As promised, here's the bonus tip that I have for all of you DSLR shooters watching this video, and it's a really simple one. It's to make sure that you've calibrated your camera and lens. If your camera and lens are not calibrated properly, you may as well forget all of the previous tips in this video, because your images won't actually be in focus. Luckily for you guys, I've already made a video on how to calibrate your camera and lenses, and that'll be up here or over here. Click on that and I'll see you over there. And as always, thanks for watching.